to share with you today that's kind of exciting to nerd out on for me is some of my research and treatment that I do with people with trauma and music. And I was lucky enough to get some grant-funded research project work a few years back to start this kind of exploration of the neurology of music and attachment and relationship and trauma and how they all kind of intersect. And in the movie, you see Ada's relationship with the piano as a really integral part of her life and herself and her growth and her death and her life. And so I think that I found that to be a good link to what I do. A lot of what I work with people who are involved in trauma is recreating self and recreating story. Even people who are not traumatized. Just living through life, we recreate ourselves over and over and over. And part of what we do is come into contact with ourselves or someone else or nature, and that can stir that experience. But we can also come into contact with music as a relational experience, and that's something that I'll share. If you want to go to the next slide. So this one interested me because as we look at how we use relationship with music to not only restore ourselves and convey experience, we've seen people use it in creative ways through trauma. And whatever your experience was with COVID, whatever your opinion is on the experience, or however you encountered it, it probably wasn't really a positive experience. Most of us struggled with it in one way or another, and we're still unfolding that. And Yo-Yo Ma blew me away when he went for his COVID vaccine and he played music for 15 minutes while he had to do the wait. He brought music to it. He shared an experience. He brought the piece that he can do the best, and he's done this in a lot of ways on earth. And this is a quote of his, that playing music is about transmitting something so that it lives inside of someone else. That's what he feels we do when we create music, or a lot of art forms, when we express a poem or paint a picture and you take it home and you have a sense of it being in you in some way, you relate to it. The experience of Ada, someone describes her music as creeping inside of me. It's like a mood that creeps inside. It's that same feeling. And there's a difference between playing music in a very instrumental way, no pun intended, but in a very strategic way of playing the right notes and looking at the music and playing it so that it's accurate, and the difference of playing it so that it's soulful and relational and it expresses your story. And that's why 5 different pianists can play a piece, and they all are going to play that piece differently, and we're going to experience it differently. Each piece of music is an expression of the person playing it, and it's a moment in time, and then it's gone. But for some reason, these are profound experiences for us when we hear music. We don't just say, wasn't that interesting? We walk away with tears in our eyes, or we feel physically moved. You'll see people move to music when they feel moved, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. You could go ahead and, next slide, thank you. So my research looked at the uses of music in helping people with relational trauma, any kind of trauma actually. I worked with a variety of people with disasters or sexual assaults or incredible catastrophic experiences with trauma. And we wanted to play off of some of the existing research we have on the neurobiology of music and communication, and see if we could structure a encounter where someone could experience music being played for them as the form of communication about their experience. So a lot of therapy that I do, I've been doing for 30 years with trauma, involves talking about the trauma and working it through, and I do that through expressive therapies or talking. But this was a little different. This wasn't actually a straight out conversation, except that it was through music, and we'll talk about that. So when we're depressed, one of the things that we know is that we like depressing music. And this is really interesting. as humans, we tend to like things that resonate with what our body is feeling. And have you ever had to be with a cheery person when you weren't cheery? That's a bummer, you know, it's not fun. Part of what's not fun about it is it's not congruent with what you're feeling. And so you have to either move yourself towards their state of being or withdraw. It's difficult. But when we hear depressing music and we're depressed, it's like the music's saying, I hear you and I see you and I get you and I'm here with you. And that's not just a fairy tale. Neurological research has demonstrated that that is actually what happens when we hear something that resonates with us. Our brain takes it in as a story that two people are here talking, and in this case it's the song and me, and the song hears me and says, I understand you. And I want to hear the song over and over because I feel like it gets me. So these are the experiences people have when they have a breakup and they keep playing that song over and over, and someone goes, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you putting yourself through this? They're not putting themselves through anything. They're bringing a companion along as they grieve and they deal with the loss. So it's pretty amazing. Robert Stolorow, if you're interested in nerding out on that part, is a psychoanalyst who he and his son, who's a blues pianist, have examined and analyzed the structure of blues music and demonstrated what about it, things like diphthongs and bends in it, that make us specifically relate to it when we're sad. And so the same thing when we're very happy, you kind of walk right on by the sad music. You want to be with the uplifting music. So we know that about people, and we don't want to take that away from them. We want to actually offer it to them when they're depressed. Another piece is Uri Hassen's research. So Uri Hassen examined people's conversations and what was going on in the brain at the point that they connect. So he had people talk nonsense and looked at what was happening in brainwave activity to the listener and the speaker. And he found that there was some activity going on that seemed to be like, yes, they're perceiving something happening. Then he moved them into relational communication that was meaningful, and at a certain point, they would nod. The person would lock in, the audience would lock in and say, yeah, I get this. At the point that the head nods were taking place, the neural mapping of their brains looked identical. And you can look up this research and see it. It looks like two identical brains with the exact same parts of the brain operating in the exact same ways to the exact same level of excitation. So what we realize from that is that when you nod and you get me, you're getting me from the inside. You've actually taken me in. And if I tell you a story about the time that, you know, I ate the best lollipop ever in the whole world and it tasted delicious, and you remember that and you think, yeah, I remember, I love lollipops. You are experiencing my story as if it's happening to you. And so this is a powerful part of how we connect and attune with people through music, because the music has the same experience for us. We internalize it and it's in our body, and now we're feeling that. We're feeling that powerful experience. In my research, I connected this ability for us to attune to each other, lock in, and have a shared experience with having a musician, a live musician, play for a trauma survivor on a one-on-one experience. So the trauma survivor could talk about whatever it was that they were compelled to share about themselves, about the trauma, and then the musician, whether it was a cellist, guitarist, with a saxophone player. I had a person with a kazoo who wanted to do it. We never worked that one out. They would play for the person what they felt in response to what the person was sharing. And so they would just sort of improvise, or maybe they'd play a piece of music that related to them at that moment. And in silence, the trauma survivor would listen, and then they would have their emotional response. They might say something, they might just cry or smile, and then the musician would play again. And they would go back and forth like this. At a certain point, the musicians started having a lot of emotions as they were playing for this person. And the trauma survivors would have say things that indicated that they felt heard and seen and that they felt connected. And then they would go into sort of lighthearted conversations about their communal experience of music. So every time it happened, we experienced head nods starting. They would nod to each other and they would smile. It was a connective experience. In that regard, neurological research at Johns Hopkins, there was a doctor who developed a CAT scan machine that could not tear apart a keyboard when someone walked in there, because metal things tend to do stuff in those sort of environments. And he had jazz musicians lay inside of the MRI machine so their brains could be examined while they played a keyboard. And outside was another doctor playing a keyboard, and they were improvising jazz back and forth at each other. They were looking at their brain activity, and they noticed that the brain was encoding this conversation between the two keyboards as speech, as language and communication. The parts of the brain that we use when we have a conversation looked exactly the same as if you're having a conversation. So again, more research about that idea that music is communication, it's a relational experience. The head nodding was a component of my research that nodded into the idea of mirror brain activity, that when we get attuned and attached and we feel connected, the head nods will start. It's one piece of it. We have the next slide. This little piece I just found a couple days ago, which was a woman in Ukraine, a child actually, she's a young girl, who is in a bomb shelter basement. They're under siege, and you can find the videos of it all over right now. And she's playing for a group of people that are over here enjoying her music. So this is that impulse, urge. We're compelled to make and create and make music. And in trauma, we tend to restore ourselves through creation, through recreating the self, through creating art. This is how we restore the self. And in Gestalt psychology, we move away from the idea of either or, and we love the word and. And what we love about it is that trauma is not something we wait for it to be gone and life to be better before we live life. We have trauma and we live life. And that's why this woman or young girl is able to do what she's doing. We don't wait till the trouble's gone. We live through the trouble and we embrace what we can in our lives. Next little slide. I'm not going into this, but I encourage you to go into this, which is the whole backstory and interwoven piece of Blackbeard in the piano, which I adore. In my life focus community groups, we share arts, either films, music, dance, poetry, and then we have discussion off of it. So we're having like a mini version here. And one of the invitations I'll give you is go look up that story of Bluebeard that they played in the play and see what it pulls you into in the movie. See what it pulls you into in yourself. Because Clarissa Pinkola Estes is an analyst who's looked at that story from a variety of angles and sees that Bluebeard, this murderous guy who comes in and women marry him, and then they find out that there are all of these dead wives there, that it's very similar to how trauma moves into someone's life and threatens to sweep away their ability to live. And knowing what's down in the depths of the Bluebeard's secret space gives us that awareness and our ability to choose. And Ada makes a choice. She chooses. Her will chooses to live, and this is kind of that story, that same story we're telling. And I love her story of the weird lullaby. She talks about that at the end, that weird lullaby. Trauma is kind of like that. It's kind of a weird lullaby. And if we listen to the music in our lives and the stories in our lives, we create the next piece of our life. and we're able to grow and change through that. So a lot of what I do with clients in trauma is help them realize that kind of ability, never-ending ability all the way to the end of our lives to continually recreate. There's always an option to become more aware. And music allows people to transcend stories that don't make sense. We can hear music and we don't have to rationalize why something happens. We don't have to make sense of it. Music honors our silence, and it creates a dialogue in that silence, allows us to answer questions in our heart, in our bodies, inhabit something and feel whole through just listening to a song or a piece of music or playing it. So next, I think I have another slide. Oh, just the last one. Just I love her finger. It's awesome, that gold finger. I love that piece. And the symbolism of this gold, this jewel that ends up after all of that. But I want to invite you to share what your feelings or thoughts are on any of that, on the movie. And Logan, you have some incredible, I love your interpretations and awareness of all the radically awesome symbolism in this movie. This movie's like a buffet for symbolism. It's just the best. So thank you for listening to me, and I'd love to hear from you.
First, a round of applause, everyone. Thank you so much.
Don't be shy. Thoughts or feelings? Yes.
I have a question. What studies or what research has there been found in terms of music's effect on some of the things you talked about, emotion and whatnot, as opposed to other art forms, poetry, literature, music, film, culinary? Is there something specific about music that is different from the rest?
Yeah, there are similarities to other art forms, but music in particular is more of an embodied sensual experience than almost any other art form. Even visual arts have less of an experience of being visceral, because we take music in an interpretive experience when we listen to the tonalities and the rhythms and the bass and the vibration, but then we take it in on a physical level as well. And we also integrate memory and emotion together very closely when we're listening to music. So the amygdala, you had another speaker talk about that. The amygdala is in the center of your brain. It sort of looks right about like that. And if you fold your neocortex over it, you now all have your free, always with you, scaled model of the brain. You can carry that anytime you want to do a presentation. And your amygdala is resting in the center of your brain, and it's accessed very closely to the memory part of your brain. And when music is felt in a visceral sense, it activates all kinds of parts of our emotional content that are related to memory experiences. And then we interpret it with that higher level area. But our bodies are already experiencing music, and to the point that they will naturally start moving to it, or tapping, or having a breath experience to music, or your tongue will move. These are all experiences that the body does that are very unique to the experience of drinking in music, or even expressing it. If you think of, if I do this for you right now, la 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 la.
La, la, la.
So you filled it in probably, and some of you did it actually out loud, and so you did very well. So sing along time. Our brain wants to complete those kinds of patterns that we know very well, so they're in us, and our body already, your body had a response to it. Even if you were silent, you probably did something in your throat. So music has that kind of experience. Poetry is less so that way. Poetry is more of a cognitive experience that goes back down to the emotions. It's not as automatic. So music has that more visceral, sensual ability to express us. It expresses us. It's not something coming outside in. So I don't know if that explains more like what you're talking about. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, what resonated with me maybe at some level is that literature has words, and so they're sort of contextualized, whereas music, lyricless music, is just sound and open to interpretation, right? Yeah.
And it's interesting too that even lyrics get interpreted differently as well. But some people can listen to the same song their whole life and not hear the words because the music is really what's sinking in for them. And you probably have songs you've heard many, many, many times in your life, and somebody asks you to sing the words to it, you'd be like, I don't know, but it's like, you can hum it out for me. Because that's the part that really sinks in on a physical level. Also, lullabies have that. If I were to sing a lullaby that you heard as a child, your body goes into all kinds of interesting places because it's registered that as safety, attunement, early experience, and we don't even think it. It's not a thought. It's a body memory, body experience. Yes.
Is there any difference between being like a passive listener to the music here or like someone who's actually generating it?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that when we're passively listening to music, many of the people who studied the effect on your nervous system is that it's very similar to being the musician. So our body does tend to get activated when we hear a drummer drum. Many of the parts of our body that would be drumming are stimulated at that time. The same thing when someone sings, our vocal cords almost mirror and start to get activated. So there's something there. But being the recipient of music is like having someone convey a story to you, and being the conveyor of it is like being the storyteller in that way. So as a storyteller, you want to be heard and you want to be understood. And Robert Capello has done a ton of research on that. If you get a chance to ever explore his work, he takes 10 seconds, I think, of a classical piece and then explains why it's amazing and awesome to us, why we have the reaction we have. And he breaks it down scientifically. But he did it because he was a musician and he was playing these amazing songs, and he realized that half the audience was like, I have no idea what he's doing. It sounds good, and I love it, but I don't get it. But when he was on Broadway playing music, people got it, and they were in it. They would talk to him about it afterwards. He said there was a distance between himself and the classical listening audience, and about 2% of them got what he was doing. So he went out there and like normalized it and said, hey, this is why that crescendo blows your mind. And he's really good at sharing that. It's pretty amazing that he was able to kind of break it down that way. Make it more accessible to people. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for being here. It is a fascinating presentation. I was wondering if you thought anything about the tactility of it and like this sort of musician and instrument relationship, because kind of in the movie, even when the piano is not being played, it's being touched, it's being stroked and cleaned, and it seems like it's a very intimate relationship with an object.
Yeah, she has, I would wager it's a sexual relationship or a sensual relationship with it. And so her ability to really symbolize that is like throughout the movie, her daughter as well. Harvey Keitel's character as well, Baines, they're all sort of being seduced and seducing and then so is the piano. So I think that's a beautiful component of it. And it's about being relationally in contact with things. For me as a Gestalt therapist, I look at a instrumentalist who can connect with their instrument in a way that is sensual, is expressing from that instrument in a very different way. I had a harpist come to my groups one time, and she explained to me while she was with the symphony in San Francisco, and she explained, you're going to watch me do this thing after I've plucked or strummed, you're going to watch me doing this around. And I said, is that just like really kind of like you're being very artistic? And she said, no, it actually changes how the sound comes out after I've plucked, for me to do these little movements. And she said, and I enjoy them, and it's like me and the harp are sort of talking. And I said, oh, that's very interesting, you should say that. So I'm doing research on that. So she was really engaged relationally, and one of the guys in our group, when she was done doing this, said, can I be the harp? You know? He literally was like drooling on her relationship with it. And you sort of felt like, I need to look away when she's doing this. It's a very sensual experience she's having over here. It was pretty cool. People name their instruments too. They have relationships with them that way. You know,
I've already answered this in a way, but at the end, this scene with her playing and that distinct tapping. Can you just share your thoughts and feelings about that?
like what I thought was happening there?
Yeah, I mean, 'cause it seems like it relates to what you said about connection, becoming the instrument. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to me as a Gestalt therapist that it becomes a creative adaptation, and she's able to continue to play, but we have this more distinct kind of marking of the connection through this piece. This becomes another instrument to me, like. But I'd love, Logan, do you have thoughts on that piece when she has the gold finger and we get the tap? Because there are other times in the movie where people are
Yeah, that's
having a
actually
rhythm.
where my head goes. There's a lot, and I don't know if everyone's seen Power of the Dog as well, but there's a lot of crossover sort of themes and things, the cleaning of objects with Bronco Henry and everything. But for me, what I always got out of it was that it was a callback to Sam Neill slamming his hand and creating a beat as an observer that isn't hers, that isn't Flora's, and that at the end, she's still in control of her beat and her music despite her having lost a finger. But that's an interpretation.
I think that's a cool one. Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about, film, I think, for me, in films like this, is that it's all open to interpretation. But for me, because this is a movie that recalls a lot, you got the scene where they're rehearsing Blackbeard and the guy's got his wings on and he chops someone's hand and says, with the blood, it'll make a great effect. And that happens an hour later. There's a lot of recall in the movie.
Yeah.
I always looked at that tapping as a recall to just the aggressive sort of oppressive beating that Sam Neill was doing on the piano. But
Yeah.
again, that's one interpretation.
Yeah, and I think it's like a reclaiming at the end.
Yeah.
I also love the fact that when Baines she's walking along teaching herself to speak, that he lets her veil stay down at the beginning. Like, she's very much, he's respecting the way she moves through her life, and they talk, the Maori woman sings about the veil right before they get on the boat and go out. Yeah. I had a client who said, obviously she died at the end, and she sunk to the depths with her piano, which was nothing but trouble, and the rest of it is all like a dream from heaven. And I think it's very much a piece of this particular client's trauma experience that was what she projected into the story. And I don't know if you want to.
I never saw it that way,
Right.
but when we spoke on the phone, you mentioned that, and I'm like, that's interesting. It's just not something that had occurred to me, but sure. I mean, it's a read that someone could have. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it kind of shows you how people in therapy can kind of use arts. They'll do it with music too. I had a woman play cello. She played a Kadai concerto. Kadai played music from Hungary as his country was being torn apart. And there's a particular Kadai concerto that is wrenching. So this woman said, for your life focus group, I will play this cello piece. I love it. No one ever wants me to play it because it's really discordant. It bothers people. It has like a visceral experience. And I said, come play it for my group. So she played it, and at times you hit the cello, you scratch at it, you do these things that Kodai was expressing this pain of this country being destroyed. And she said nothing about what this piece was about. She said, I'm going to play a Kodai concerto. And she played it, and she's tearing at it. And two women in the audience said, this was really hard to hear. I didn't like it. It certainly wasn't what I expected when I came to hear a cello. And then one woman said, she was crying, and she said, it reminds me of the Holocaust. So she heard it, and she felt heard, and she said it felt like somebody understood what this feels like, which I don't even have words for. And we talked about that, and then she heard the story, and the cellist said, it's exactly about this. It's about this kind of loss and unspeakable destruction of my world. And as a cellist, it's really cool to play it for somebody who finally understood. So, the instrumentalist was understood. Very cool.
I'm wondering, you spoke earlier about people listening to depressing music when they're depressed. And I don't know, had there been studies in terms of like brainwave activity or whatnot as to when they're doing that, is there a form of sort of subconscious catharsis that's happening? Or are they sort of plumbing themselves deeper into the depression so that they can be in touch with their feelings, or both? Or, is there in other words, is there a danger to that, or is it helping them in some way?
Yeah, we have to, as therapists, we have to kind of assess that. Like, what's the effect this is having? Because some people can listen to angry music and it'll make them more angry. Other people, it'll release the anger. Same with depressive music. If you're very depressed, it can be like a hug. Like, I hear you, it's sad, and I'm here with you. Or it can be like, come with me down to the depths and stay in the darkness and get more depressed. So I listen when I work with clients about how much of their experience with it is helpful or hurtful. And if a person leans kind of towards being more self-destructive, that's probably what's going on when they're really into the music. And I look at, do you have an ego that can sit back and say, this is what I'm doing right now with this music? Or do you just kind of become one with the song, and that's somebody who's going to lose themselves in it, So we kind of watch that and kind of recommend to people, it sounds like you need to go for a walk, you need to move your body, you need to talk to somebody or do something to activate. And it's a good point you're bringing up, because not everyone benefits from, playing that same song 100 times in one weekend. But it's interesting. It always reminds me of when I was in high school, when I broke up with a boyfriend, and all the way to school and all the way back, I put in my, probably wasn't an 8-track, I'm not quite that old, it was a cassette, and I stuck it in, and it was some sad song that I played, and I couldn't wait to play it, every day. And then one day, I just realized, I'm not playing that anymore, I'm over it. So it was my little buddy for the drive, my sad little experience. I made it through. We're friends now. Okay.
Very cool.
Other thoughts?
Maybe you have time for one more question, anyone?
Does anyone else want to take it? I've already spoken.
Oh, we can do two. I think we can do a couple more? Okay.
Kind of on the note of your cello story, I was wondering if there's any musicians who work from trauma to create pieces that resonate with that, like Threnody for the victims of Hiroshima kind of come to mind, like this sort of gut-wrenching destruction of an entire nation.
Yeah, and like producing something out of it. And yeah, I think I can't, like Threnody definitely comes to mind. In fact, I have a colleague who wrote poetry in a book called Threnody as well, so it reminded me of that. She wrote that out of all the losses in her life, and it's a compulsion that many instrumentalists or singers or people have to express it and create something out of it. And very often people that are on the brink of kind of imploding on their trauma will resurrect themselves out of it with creativity. So I think you're catching that in the world. even Eric Clapton's song "Here in Heaven." You know, who could imagine writing that after his son died falling from a window? And then who could imagine not writing it? You know, what's the next thing you want to sing when you're in that kind of grieving is some kind of statement about it, or marker, or ability to walk back into the music world and maybe do it through, this is my first walk, is this thing that happened. And there's another one, Tori Amos wrote a piece called Me and a Gun. And I saw her perform it live, and it's about her being sexually assaulted. And she sings it a cappella. And the first time that my husband and I heard her sing was in a tiny venue. And she sat on the edge of the stage and got really quiet and stared a guy in the front row right in the face and sang it to him the entire time, a cappella, about this sexual assault. And dead silence, and he just leaned forward and listened to her the whole time. So she's saying it to sort of pack a punch at the world, but at the same time the world's meeting her in it, in that moment, and saying, I hear you. You know, I hear what you've been through. And I think some artists are very good at using their creativity to heal in that way. This has been a cool discussion. You guys are coming up with really interesting, cool things. I love getting excited. I love not over-preparing, because it's, you know, like I said to Logan, it's less boring for me, less boring for you, and it allows for these kinds of unfoldments. So I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Let's give another round of applause, please, for Dr. Paltin. Thank you so much.